Let's go.
Let's go. Oh no.
Do you want to?
Sorry. I'll let you.
Next one.
I'm excited and I feel relaxed and I'm ready to party. Let's say sorry. You don't need to do that. You don't need to apologize. It's a fucked up female habit. You don't need to be sorry for anything ever.
Can you guess what every woman's worst nightmare is?
I don't have razor suits.
I have nothing to prove to you.
When I'm good, I'm very good. But when I'm bad, I'm better.
I say when it comes to stardom and Lauren, there are no accidents.
Hi, Karen Peterson.
Hello, and welcome to Citizen Dame, the podcast where we would rather talk about movies than all the crap that goes on behind the scenes, especially if we're not going to talk about all the abusive male directors out there. I'm Karen Peterson, joined by the amazing Lauren Humphreys Brooks.
I love that some people will understand what we're saying and other people will be like, what the fuck are you talking about? But we are very online. I think that there are times when on this podcast where it's just like, we are incredibly online. We should probably be less online sometimes and it might be better.
It's true. It's true. Very, very true. How are you, Lauren?
I'm doing pretty well.
Yeah. How was your week?
Well. It has been tiring. It has suddenly gotten cold in New York City. And by cold, I mean like we've gone from being in the 80s to being in the 60s. Although today we're supposed to be in the 70s, so whatever. But yeah, definitely feeling fall. Fall is coming.
Yeah, our high today is 95.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. It's weird because it's been getting down into the 50s at night, but it's creeping back up into the 90s during the day. And tomorrow is supposed to be the hottest at 99, but it's supposed to stay that way for most of the week. So that'll be fun.
Fun times.
I'm glad to know it's cooling off on the East Coast though, because I'm going to be heading over that direction in a couple weeks. So I'm going to a film festival in Virginia.
I was going to say I wouldn't put too much stock in how comfortable it is going to be in Virginia, to be totally honest. But
really,
I mean it's definitely warmer down there.
Yeah, but in October,
probably not.
It'll be cooler than California.
It'll be cool. Yeah, I was going to say it's going to be cooler than California.
Okay, that's what I'm counting.
But on. Yes, even in October, I have some friends who live down in North Carolina as well, and they're always really sad because they love fall. And it's just like we don't have fall down here. Really. It's like, oh my god, it's 65, it's so cold.
It was weird when I lived in Quebec for a while, and the first fall I was there, I was nice and comfortable. I thought, it was not cold to me, but all these locals were like bundled up in sweaters and scarves and stuff like September 1st. And they looked at us like we were crazy running around with short sleeves. I was just like, this is wonderful. What are you guys talking about?
Well, you got to come to like New York or Massachusetts during the winter when we're all walking around in flip-flops and shorts. So it's 4 inches of snow. That's nothing.
I mean, I walk around in shorts and flip-flops in the winter, but that's because it's 75 degrees. Oh, my nephew is thinking about going to school in Arizona, and I'm just like, why would you want to go place that's hotter?
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah, Phoenix. If he's going anywhere near Phoenix is hotter than fuck.
Yeah.
Like it is like it's the surface of the sun.
Yeah. Well, he's looking at a couple of schools. He was looking at ASU. He was looking at the University of Arizona. And I was like, University of Arizona has so much better weather. And he's like, yeah, but I didn't really like the campus. I'm like, okay. All right. At least Tempe has a surprisingly good sushi restaurant. So anyway. Yeah. So that's how we are right now this week. But we are really excited for today's episode because we are going to talk about
Let's talk about sex.
Woo, yeah. And I don't know if anybody has noticed, but sex sometimes makes appearances in movies, and so that's why we're going to talk about it. Yeah. So first of all, let's get into just a little bit of the history of sex on screen, but like in a what was it like pre-code, post-code, during the code, all that stuff. So, Lauren, why don't you give us kind of a rundown of early depictions of sex on film?
Well, I think that to start off, we should definitely mention that that a lot of what we're talking about is more mainstream films. We're not really talking about exploitation movies. We're talking about American films,
And we're
particularly.
also not really talking much about the porn industry, which is this whole totally
No,
separate thing.
but some of the history of sex in mainstream cinema is like wrapped up with the porn industry, unfortunately, or with porn aesthetic.
True.
And so to just give a really quick rundown, I think that most people know about the Hays Code, and in terms of the dictates that the Hays Code had over sex and gender, you cannot explicitly represent sex. And then there were also all kinds of other dictates, like, kisses could only last a certain amount of time. Doors had to remain open, clothes had to remain on, men had to have their feet on the floor, that kind of thing. So representation of sex in post-code Hollywood, or in code Hollywood, right, was very, very restricted. And that actually tends to be the thing that we focus on when we talk about the production code. We focus on the representations of sex and gender, less so on some of the other things that were going on with the Hays Code, which we've talked about in the past. But so for our purposes, this is about the way that sex was represented. The result, one of the kind of unintended consequences of the code in Hollywood was that because you could no longer explicitly represent or really even talk about sex in the movies, there had to be other roles for women, right? It couldn't just be about sexuality. Not that sexuality was like completely banned or that people didn't find a way around it. One of the other issues that they had to grapple with was, how do you represent sex, sexuality, sex in marriage, sex outside of marriage, but still get it past the censors? So you had this kind of dual thing going on, that as a result of censorship, that was, women had to have positive non-sexual roles, and because you had to give your actresses something to do, and you had to find a way to represent sex that was not actually directly depicting or directly discussing sex. This in part kind of gave rise, especially in the 1930s, to things like screwball comedies, later on to film noir, as kind of ways of substituting language for sex. So if you look at a lot of the screwball comedies, the way that the romance develops between the lead characters is through talking. That's where all of the sexual tension comes from. You look at even films that are slightly pre-code, like It Happened One Night, into some of the later ones, like My Favorite Wife, or some of the William Powell Myrna Loy films. You have all of these indications of sex, but a lot of it comes from innuendo and conversation, right? The characters fall in love, the characters relate to each other via talking. At the same time, you have a lot of representations of women in very progressive professions, right? You have women who are newspaper reporters, women who are cab drivers, actresses, all kinds of things. And so lawyers, Kate Hepburn talked about that she would never, in a post-code world, she would never have gotten to play a lawyer, right? And so you've got this kind of weird progressiveness coming out as a result of not being able to represent sex on screen. This is not a defense of the code. I want to state that this is not saying, oh, wasn't the Hays Code great? No, it really wasn't. There were all kinds of other problems. And part of the reason why we had kind of the backlash in the later 50s and 60s was because of the Hays Code. So right. This is not like a defense of it. This is just saying this is what people were having to deal with and grapple with. You do see in these films a lot of people getting around some of the restrictions. So famously, Notorious got around a kiss can only last for so long by having a love scene where everybody keeps their clothes on. No one sits on a bed. There is no indication that they are having sex at any point, but allows them to kiss each other multiple times throughout the scene. So and there was a lot of that going on. I recently watched a William Powell Myrna Loy film where they play a married couple. And the undercurrent of the entire film is basically that everyone keeps on interrupting them, they're trying to fuck the entire movie. And people keep on interrupting him. They keep on getting cock blocked, basically, to the point that he pretends that he's insane in one section of the film, and like literally cannot get his wife alone, basically. So this entire movie, really, the undercurrent of it, the entire movie is about sex, and it's a married couple. We know that they're sleeping together. These are not people who are, like, have a chaste marriage or anything like that. But so that's what was going on in Code Hollywood. When you get to kind of the beginning of the downfall of the production code post about 1948, things begin to loosen up a lot more, and you see a lot more explicit sexual content, more clear implications of sex and of rape and of assault, even running throughout the films of the late 40s and into the 50s, and then finally into the 60s. One of the things that then becomes influential is porn aesthetic, because there've been no mainstream representations of sex. Basically, you know, if we think about that, we went through literal decades where mainstream film could not show it, could barely even imply it. Mm-hmm. And we're really restricted with what they could show. So the only available representations on screen, visual representations of sexuality, are some, you know, European films, but primarily porn and exploitation stuff. And that's something that is running, you know, pornography's been around forever, right? But those are the only visual representations that we have. So porn aesthetic, and particularly 1960s and 70s porn aesthetic, folds into mainstream filmmaking. That's how films get made. When you talk about a sex scene in a movie, we go immediately to the porn aesthetic. And, you know, if you just look at a lot of these films, you can see that influence. And that's an influence that has stayed with us until the current moment. So when we talk about, I think, on-screen sexuality and sex in the movies, at least in terms of mainstream films, we need to really note that we are starting from a place of pornography being heavily influential. And pornography, as we know, and I really hope we don't have to tell anyone this, is heavily male-centric. It is heavily the male gaze. And a lot of it depends upon the exploitation and the dissection of the female body. Period. Like that's just a fact of porn aesthetic, particularly in the periods that we're talking about. So that is feeding into the development of showing sex on screen in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and to today. So kind of simplistic, but that's the basic history of a lot of what we're talking about here.
Yeah. So when we get into this is a question for you. When we get into like post-code and really start to see more depictions of sex on screen, or start to see any depictions of sex on screen, what are some examples, just referring to what you're talking to where it's this porn aesthetic, what are some examples of good depictions and bad depictions?
Some good depictions. Trying to think about that, actually. Oh, the other thing that I did want to mention the fact that women's roles then change, and you can see them change, particularly starting in the 1950s and then running through the 60s and 70s. Yeah. So women, and in fact, Shirley MacLaine gave a really interesting interview, I think in the 70s, about this, about how suddenly women were being, basically her argument was women are being put back in the bedroom. Mm-hmm. And that women become more sexual and more explicitly sexualized. In terms of like, I'm trying to think of like really positive depictions from that era. I mean, certainly even things like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes is actually very positive representations of sex. Now, again, it isn't explicit particularly, but it is a lot more sexual than something that you're going to see in the 1930s and 40s. There's a lot, I mean, there's an entire sequence where Jane Russell is walking around admiring men's bodies, and they are all practically naked. So I think that would be one. Some Streetcar Named Desire. A lot of the Tennessee Williams adaptations are much more explicitly sexual. The implications of things like assault and rape, but also desire, are again much clearer, much more explicit. You get films like Sweet Bird of Youth with Paul Newman, Long Hot Summer with Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward. Trying to think of Suddenly Last Summer to a certain degree, although what is actually going on there is a question sometimes. But and you also have to note that culture is changing as well. You do get in the 60s and 70s, you get the sexual revolution, you get women possessing their sexuality more. I mean, in films like Taxi Driver, which don't have direct sex scenes, but do have people visiting a porn theater.
Right.
A lot of and again, it's questionable how mainstream you want to actually say that these films are, but when you look at a lot of the blaxploitation films, there's a lot of sex in those films and very visually influenced by porn.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of some others that I can't right now.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like in the moment, it's hard to think of examples, and I'm sure there are lots that people are listening to right now are like, what about this one?
Well, I mean, even just look at the films of people like Brian De Palma or Paul Schrader, Paul Schrader's Cat People, which is significantly later. All of those erotic thrillers that we talk about where you have sex scenes or you at least have very heavy implications of sex, nudity, etc.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because once you get into the 80s and the 90s, it becomes even more explicit and tends to be heavily sexualizing women over men. You start to see a lot more female nudity and almost no male nudity, other than butts, you know. But yeah, it's interesting if you look at by the decade the history of the way sex is represented, and it's interesting to just going back to what you were talking about with the way it was depicted, you know, during the time of the Hays Code and then after the Hays Code was over, but they still weren't necessarily being super explicit about it. And it's funny now, you know, as an adult to go back and watch certain movies that maybe I watched when I was younger and didn't get that they were talking about sex, and realizing now like, oh, they're totally talking about doing it, you know? Like I remember being so shocked when I realized that in Casablanca that Rick and Ilsa totally had like this, you know, strong sexual relationship and chemistry and stuff. I was like, wait, I didn't get that when I was a kid.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You get these little. I mean, we've talked about it before. These cinematic shorthands, right? Where it's just like, okay, if we fade out and then fade back in, and it's the same scene, and they're still together, but later they've had sex,
Yeah.
right? You do get, you know, directors like people like Hitchcock or Howard Hawks, kind of giving these sly little indicate, you know, visual representations, right? The train going into the tunnel kind of thing.
Fireworks.
And then yeah, fireworks. No, exactly. It is this shorthand of like, and then they had sex.
Right.
You know, you get that in earlier films as well. Again in the 30s and 40s. So this use of language and banter as standing in for sex. In the Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers films, you know, they often talked about the fact that the dance sequences were standing in for sex, right? You can't have them getting into bed together, but you can have them dancing together. They're fully clothed. They're like, but it's very sexual. It's very romantic,
Yeah.
right? And so, yeah, I think that that's always something we have to note, that it's not like there wasn't indications of sexuality in these films. A lot of the time it was ways of getting around what the censors were telling them they could actually show.
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking about this last night. What is, if you can remember, what is the first sex scene you can remember seeing in a movie? For me, it was Top Gun. I was 9 years old.
That's interesting, Karen. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I know. But I was thinking about that and I was like, oh, that could explain some things.
Okay, so the most vivid memory I have, and this has something about me as well, was actually the film Earth Girls Are Easy, with Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis. And there's a very weird sort of alien sex scene. That's actually quite sweet. It's like very romantic. And again, it's one of those sex scenes where it's not like it isn't pornographic particularly, but it's like, yes, they are like rolling around in the bed and kissing and all of that stuff. So I think that's definitely one of the most memorable ones.
Okay, I feel like now I need to do a deep dive into exploring people's biggest and earliest film crushes and tying that to, did you see them have sex on screen? Because there could be something here.
I mean, it was definitely formative. I was like, huh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's probably the earliest, but it's interesting to actually look at some of those sex scenes in mainstream films where you do get you definitely get more female nudity, like you said, you get breasts particularly, and you might get a male butt, maybe. That's kind of pushing it a little bit, but a lot of the time it's very sort of floaty. Like there's definitely this like fade in, fade out, hands grasping, all of that kind of thing, where you know what's going on, but you're not seeing much.
Right.
Going back really quickly to your question about like what are some films that were influenced by the porn aesthetic. I can't believe I didn't think of this one. Last Tango in Paris.
Oh yeah, I have never watched
yeah.
that movie, so and I never will.
That's definitely one that is I mean, I hope I don't have to explain it to people. So if you look at that movie, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And that's definitely one of the earlier ones. That's 1972.
Yeah. Okay. So what about positive representations of sex, whether it's heterosexual, homosexual, whatever it might be? We talk sometimes about like, oh, that was actually a really lovely scene. Like this week when this conversation came up, I was thinking about the movie If Beale Street Could Talk, and there's a sex scene in it, and it's actually so beautiful. It's really this the way that it's filmed, the way that the camera really lingers on both of them and really feels like this is two people who are deeply, deeply in love with each other. And everything about that scene is beautiful. It doesn't feel like it doesn't feel exploitative. It doesn't feel like it's just thrown in there just to be there. Like there's a reason that scene exists, and it's just beautiful. So that was one that I thought of. What about you?
Yeah. I think that's a really, really good, particularly of more recent films, because there has been a lack of, I think, positive representations of particularly heterosexual sex.
Yeah.
Directly, and some of the things. So, I mentioned Earth Girls Are Easy, which is positive. It's a positive scene. Top Gun, positive scene. Everybody seems to be enjoying themselves, kind of thing. But again, there's this pulling back on that of like, we're not really going to show it in any sense. So
yeah.
And I think if Beale Street Could Talk is one of the more explicit, but also more positive representations. The one that I came back to, and again, this is a French film, but Portrait of a Lady on Fire has very positive representation of sex. The brief sex scene in A League of Their Own in the most recent series. Again, like you don't get much, there's not tons of sex in that show, but there is some, and again, very positive representation. But the other one that I thought of was Bound, and I was like, I keep on thinking of lesbian sex scenes. So these are not heterosexual sex scenes, but I do think that there's actually a point to that in representing pleasure, it seems that both that queer filmmakers in particular, queer writers, et cetera, and queer sex generally has more positive associations in cinema than heterosexual sex, because I think of some of the issues that we're talking about here. The conflation also of particularly heterosexual sex with rape and violence.
Yeah.
And not being able to tell the difference sometimes in these films.
Yeah. Because sometimes even the way rape scenes are filmed, it's like it's not filmed in a way where it's very clear that this is a terrible thing. You know, it sounds so weird to say it like that, but like this is one thing that really struck me with Jennifer Kent's The Nightingale was in those really brutal scenes. I mean, that is not an easy movie to watch, but the camera is always on her. It's always on the victim's face. You see her experience and you can feel just the horror that she's experiencing. You never see the men that are brutalizing her. You never see them and getting any pleasure out of it. And that's part of the problem. But going back to just sex in movies and not rape in movies, but I think the first time I ever saw a scene, this is so weird, but I think the first time I ever saw a scene of a woman or a girl, like, or at least that's really stood out to me, where the focus is on her enjoyment and not his, was the movie Fear. Do you remember that movie?
I do remember. Are you talking about the roller coaster scene?
Yes. And I was just like,
now see, that had an impact on me when I saw it on television.
Yeah.
I was just like, what? Oh my.
And I was like, that's yeah. But that's the thing, is like, that is such a standout scene, not because the movie is great, not because that scene is particularly like well done, but because it's so rare to see the focus on the girl in that situation, you know? So that was I don't know if I would say, just because of what that movie is, I don't know that I could say it's a positive representation, but that particular scene was like, oh, girls do get to enjoy this too. I don't know.
I mean, it's a positive representation in the scene
Right.
itself.
But when you look at it in the larger movie, same with a new movie that's out this weekend, Don't Worry, Darling. That is a movie that is difficult to talk about right now, and I'm not going to spoil anything about it, but the scenes between Florence Pugh and Harry Styles, they're this young married couple that are totally obsessed with each other, and they have a lot of sex, and pretty much all of the times that they are having sex, it's all about her and her enjoyment of it. It's not like the focus is never on him. You never really see like, you know that he's kind of just obsessed with his wife, but like in a seemingly healthy way, but you never really get to see or need to see his experience, because, you know, it's about her. Once you find out what's really happening in that movie, it changes the context a bit, kind of like in Fear. But not like Fear at all. Like totally different movies, but just like the same idea, where it's like, oh, okay, this takes a different meaning now. But those scenes are really shot where it's very much about her, not about him.
I mean, I haven't seen Don't Worry, Darling yet, so I cannot comment on that one. But I think that a lot of what we're talking about is the difference between the male gaze and the female gaze.
Yes, yeah.
And you know, and I think that, you know, some of it is so much of this is also cultural, right? It's not just, obviously film does not exist in a vacuum or a void. It exists within the wider culture and within the context of the wider culture, and how our perceptions of sex, sexuality, what is okay, what isn't, changes. But one film actually that I just thought of in talking about this, and it's an odd film in a lot of ways because it is very non-traditional sexuality, but the film Secretary with Maggie Gyllenhaal and James Spader, which is about a BDSM S&M relationship between a boss and his secretary. But again, all of the representations of sex are very much about their combined pleasure and them enjoying themselves. And actually, and it's odd because, like I say, this is non-traditional, it's BDSM, etc. But it treats it with a great deal of sensitivity and kindness and tenderness. that you don't see a great deal of. And at a certain point, I'm beginning to wonder, like, well, how do we classify mainstream movies? Because we don't have a studio system in the way that we used to.
Mm-hmm.
What is really viewed as being mainstream and what isn't. But I think that is one film that has a very positive view of a heterosexual relationship that also has a kink aspect to it, but that isn't abusive, that isn't in any sense non-consensual.
Yeah. I have not seen that movie, so I will have to take your word for it, but I hear what you're saying.
It is an interesting film.
Okay.
I must say. I will also say, do not Google best sex scenes in movies.
Yeah, don't do that.
And also some of the regular publications, I'm just like, did you watch that? Because I don't think you did.
Uh-oh.
I'm pretty positive that you did not see this movie, because that's not, no, we're not going to do that.
Well, but who's writing those articles?
Men.
Mm-hmm. Yep, there you go.
Almost exclusively.
Yeah. Another one actually I was just thinking about is The Shape of Water, which I think counts as heterosexual.
Well, he's male, yes.
Exactly. And yeah, but there's a couple of different things going on in that movie, because you also get to see a woman enjoying herself. She masturbates every morning as part of her daily routine. And how often do we see that in movies? But separate from that, the scene where she and the creature when they flood the bathroom, that is such a beautiful scene too. Like, just it's the way that is shot, the colors, the way that the focus is on both of them. Again, another one of those, like, they're both enjoying this, but it's also just such a beautiful scene. So that's a great example too.
Yeah, that's true. And understandably, or not understandably, but predictably,
Right.
the reaction of a lot of people online was, oh, it's the fish fucking movie.
I just saw someone say that again the other day, and I was just like, it has been 6 fucking years. Get over it.
Yeah, grow up. Seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about that in terms of the audience response to sexual scenes. The another film that I just thought of in this conversation is The English Patient.
Oh yeah.
And The English Patient, again, has a number of sex scenes. What's really interesting about it is that we don't see a lot of them being naked together, right? We see, like, most of the sex scenes, they're fully clothed, which is odd. But very passionate, very much, and again, a lot of focusing on her, a lot of focusing on the fact that she is enjoying herself.
Yeah.
And I think that there is this dearth of positive representations of heterosexual relationships generally.
Yeah, that is true.
And so, a lot of the things that we're talking about, even, a lot of things we're talking about would be classified as less traditional sexuality. So in The Shape of Water.
Mm-hmm.
So like I said, Secretary, not certain whether you really want to put stuff like 50 Shades of Grey in there, but and also queer sexuality. So some of the other films that I mentioned, and all of those, I think, is kind of speaking to the fact that when we see pleasure being focalized through the female character, it is so often via non-traditional forms of sexuality, so non-heteronormative, non-heterosexual,
Right.
in some way, right? And that's unfortunate, but I think that, again, it's partially about our culture, but partially also about this influence of pornography and the porn aesthetic, and the dissection of the female body. That it's what's really important is that we see her naked, not that we see her enjoying herself in any way.
Yeah, which is, I think, when we talk about same-sex relationships in film, I think that we see a difference. I know there's been a lot of discussion about Bros, which is coming out, I think, next week, the Billy Eichner film, and they're marketing that as the first studio movie about gay people ever that is entirely, all the cast is LGBTQ plus. There's not even the straight people are played by LGBTQ actors, which is awesome. But there's been a lot of examples recently. This is becoming more common to have same-sex couples in film and letting them actually enjoy all the benefits of being in relationships. And I think that um, just to your point about, so much of the way sex has been depicted on screen does come from, this porn aesthetic. What we see with same-sex films is not that. So there's definitely a difference in the way that those relationships are presented on screen. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I think that a lot of what we're talking about is it's moving away from the male gaze when what it really comes out to. And I do think, we have to make distinctions, and we've talked about this issue before. There's a distinction between the male gaze and the female gaze. The female gaze is not just the reverse of the male gaze.
Right.
And there's also a queer gaze that is wrapped up in that as well. So I think one of the unfortunate things that I'm thinking about, even as we're talking about it, is that there are so few positive and explicit representations of heterosexual sex. And by that, I mean, no one is being abused. No one might be a murderer. No one is, no one is cheating on their significant other, etc.
They both actually like each other.
They like each other. They're actually having fun. It's enjoyable for everybody involved, right? And there's not a lot of that. And I think that that's sad, first of all, but it's also implying, I think, at a wider cultural level, that heterosexual sex isn't pleasant, that particularly for women, that it isn't positive. It isn't a positive experience, again, particularly for women. And that is deeply problematic. And I think that we do have to think about what we are being shown in media, because, even as we were just mentioning, what was the first sex scene you ever saw in a movie? We are influenced by the things that we see on the screen. We're influenced by what to expect, how we're supposed to feel, all of those things. And if the only positive representations are, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't have positive representations of queer relationships and queer sex and other, quote, non-traditional sexualities, but the fact that we have so few positive representations of heterosexual relationships and heterosexual sex is very problematic and very dangerous for a lot of people. So I just in all of this conversation, that's something I was thinking about. I was like, this is not good. I don't like this.
Yeah. Well, and just thinking about that too, like some of the earliest examples, I can't think of any specifics right now off the top of my head, but just like thinking back on when it first became more common to see same-sex kisses, even just on TV. It was always girls, and it was always really for the straight male viewers. It was never for the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, it was always about male pleasure. It was about men. And again, it goes back to that porn aesthetic. The, lesbian porn is very often not lesbian porn.
Right.
It is men inserting themselves at some level into a scene with two sexy women or something like that. It's women performing for men.
Yeah.
And that is the constant implication in a lot of that stuff. And that bleeds into, as we're talking about, that bleeds into mainstream representations of up to and including, just girls kissing or something like that.
Right.
Sorry, what was the initial question that you had earlier? I kind of went off on a tangent.
Sorry,
I went off on a tangent there.
Well, I think it was just like, when same-sex scenes or relationships appear in films now, because they're not being filtered through this male gaze, because those stories aren't being told for straight white men, it's better, and it's those relationships are typically depicted Um, I don't know, just it feels like they're more real. It feels like they're more honest. I mean, doesn't feel that way. They are more real and more honest. But
Hmm.
what are some recent examples of some good depictions of this?
Well, like I said, Portrait of a Lady on Fire, and I think
Yeah.
the League of Their Own are very good. Um,
The first time I saw a full sex scene between two men that I can actually remember that didn't like cut away or anything was there's a show on Netflix called Special, and the first season was they were short form. The second season it was the longer form, like full episodes. But there's a scene where these two guys are having sex, and I was just like, I don't know why, but it just like all of a sudden in that moment I was watching it and I was like, I have literally never seen this before, like not filmed this way. And it was just so interesting. That was just a couple of years ago. That was probably within the last 5 years. Um, I think that this is
mhm.
something that we're starting to see more now, but I don't know. I
Yeah,
struggle to come up
definitely.
with male examples because so much of it has been women because that I think even when it's the goal is not to present this for men, I think it's easier to sell it.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, you look at a film like Bound, which is very much not the male gaze at all.
Right.
But was sold sort of as like, oh, we get to see these hot girls banging kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's the way that it's marketed. Yeah, a lot. If you look at a lot of, I mean, we've talked about this before, but a lot of the representations of queer men in film is very humorous, or tragic, one or the
Hmm.
other. Um, there was one film that I was thinking about, and now I'm blanking on it again. Carol is definitely one.
Oh yeah.
Again, it's lesbian representation there. Maurice, that was one of the other ones with Hugh Grant and James, and I can't remember his last name now. But again, it's kind of a tragic story in a lot of ways, although it has a fairly positive ending. But and I'm struggling to remember if there's a consistent like explicit sex scene. I think
Hmm.
that there is. Uh, but it is about this romantic relationship between these two men and kind of grappling, and it's set in the past, and kind of grappling with the social stigma and the things that they have to deal with as a result of that. But again, it's a positive in a lot of ways, not thoroughly, but it's in a lot of ways it's a very positive view of male homosexuality.
Yeah. I know obviously one of the big examples here is Brokeback Mountain, but
Yeah.
I don't and I know a lot of people have a lot of opinions about that movie. I don't know that I can say that I feel like it's positive because I mean there are definitely moments and it's this relationship between these two men, but I feel like so much of it is like um when they're specifically having sex, it's not about two men coming together. It's more about um I don't know, almost like to me, the way I watch it, it almost is more just about like satisfying something, but not
Mm-hmm.
in any sort of a romantic way.
I think that that's a good observation there. Um, and I think that some of this is also about, the way that gay men are perceived within culture.
Hmm. Yeah,
And the repression that undoubtedly has filtered through all of that.
right. And I'm
And
not in any way criticizing Brokeback Mountain by saying that. I just, to me, when I look at like, when I'm thinking the term positive representation, I'm thinking like these two people just really love each other and they're just enjoying this and they're living in the moment. And I feel like with Brokeback Mountain, it's just there's so much
mhm.
else happening with that movie that I don't think that that's the point.
Yeah, I think that you're right. One that I just thought of is God's Own Country from 2017.
Oh, I
Uh,
didn't see that one.
and that one again, there's tragedy that's attached to it, but there's also a lot of hope, and this kind of basically one of the main characters is constantly having meaningless sex, essentially, and then he meets this other person and begins falling in love and doesn't quite know how to deal with that, right? So but again, the representations of sex are very explicit and are very positive, like especially as the film goes on and their relationship deepens and develops.
Cool. I haven't seen that one, so
It is. I do recommend it. It is a really interesting film.
nice. Well, we did get a question from Connor that's in talking about all the things that we've been talking about. He says, does the application of the term male gaze have a negative impact on the perception of non-cis hetero men enjoying sex scenes? So I don't know about them as viewers enjoying sex scenes, but I think in the context of movies, because I can read this question two different ways. So
non-cis hetero men enjoying sex. Well, first of all, I think we should say that neither
so
one of us are non.
else.
Yeah. Well, but non-cis. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So we're talking about men, or are we
Everybody
talking about
who's not straight
everybody
men.
who's not straight? Okay.
Yeah.
Let's say, yeah. Because I was going to say, well, we're not non-cis hetero men because
Right.
we're not. We
Right,
do not
yeah.
identify as men. But okay, yes,
It's a good
I
question. It's early in the morning, and I was it's a good question.
We're interpreting your question in two different ways. Let's interpret it as everybody who's not straight man.
Yes.
So if the issue is about the term itself, I think the term is very useful, but the term has been misunderstood.
Yeah.
The term has, first of all, been misunderstood to apply to every film, which, as we have discussed many times, is not correct. And it's not even correct to say that every film made by a male director or written by a male writer
or with a
takes
male
on the male gaze.
protagonist.
Or with a male protagonist takes on the male gaze. That's not, it doesn't necessarily follow. It's addressing a specific kind of voyeurism and a specific kind of, implication of the pleasure of looking.
Yeah.
That relates to a straight cis male viewer, white male viewer usually as well. And so I think that the term gets misapplied to as, being kind of a blanket term to encompass everything. But some of what we're talking about when we're talking about these different representations of sex scenes is exactly that. I think it's a useful term because it's saying like this scene was made with a specific viewer in mind, and that viewer is straight, that viewer is male, that viewer is probably white, and that viewer is cis.
Mm-hmm.
And it is about the pleasure of that viewer. It is not about it, and so it objectifies it. All these things we're talking about. It deconstructs the female body very often. It treats this as an act of dominance. I think that then we also have to consider whether or not, the implication that has on the straight man, right? This is how you're supposed to understand sexuality,
right?
Which is not a particularly positive angle to take anyways. And then, again, this is all wrapped up in our culture and our society and our history. So it's difficult to separate all of those things out. But no, I think that this is a very useful term as long as we understand what it actually means.
I agree with you that it's a useful term. What I would say in regards to the question is that for me, like if I'm talking to a friend or reading a review or something like that, and whether they specifically use the term male gaze or just the way that they're talking about the film strongly indicates that that's what, that's the main focus. It definitely does. I'm going to be honest. It has a negative impact on my perception going into that movie. I'm going to have a lot of assumptions, most of those assumptions being, oh, this movie probably isn't for me, or at least these scenes are not going to be scenes that I'm going to enjoy watching. It
definitely alienates viewers. Yeah. And I think that, again, I think that some of this is about misapplication of the term as well, that you not understanding what it means.
Mm-hmm.
So
but it definitely it sets up expectations and yeah. And So yeah, that's anyway, sorry, I cut you off.
No, I think that you're right. It sets up these expectations of what it's going to be, but I think that some of that is also an expectation that or a misunderstanding that the person talking might have about what the male gaze actually is versus what it isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And again, a lot of this is also about interpretation. You can interpret this as this is the male gaze, but I might look at it and go like, I don't think that it is actually.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Cool. Um, all right. Well, is there anything else you wanted to say about sex?
So many things to say about sex. I think my final point is just in terms of everything that we've talked about is I think that there's a reason why there's so many women who prefer classical Hollywood.
Yeah.
And one of it is because you see these female characters being prized not solely for their bodies, right? Or solely for their looks or their sexuality. You see women being represented as a lot of different things and still being desirable.
Yeah.
And it treats a lot of the time, because of this emphasis on language and innuendo, it treats romance and desire as something fun and bantery and something that you can make jokes about. Whereas the more that we've been allowed to represent sexuality, the darker it's gotten in a lot of ways.
That's true. That's a good point. So, with that, let's talk a little bit about what we've been watching lately.
Okay.
What have you watched this week, Lauren?
I watched
Anything good?
X.
Yay! Speaking of sex and movies
I was gonna say,
and the
speaking of
porn
sex
industry.
and the porn industry and female pleasure, I do have to say, for a film that is about a like serial killer murdering people on the set of a low budget porn film, the actual representations of sex are pretty positive. Like the porn scenes that they have are like, everybody's just having a nice time here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is a good time. Everybody's good. It's repression that's bad.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil it too much because I do think that people should go in with as little knowledge of this film as possible. I kind of saw where it was going. I was like, I think I know what's going to happen here. Yep, it happened. But I really liked it. I really liked what the film was saying. I really liked I liked how slowly it developed. I mean, the mayhem doesn't really start until the third act, pretty much. So there's a lot of development. There's a lot of character development.
And there's tension along the way, but it's not. It doesn't really get into it until later on.
The dialogue and the conversations that the different characters are having, and how it's really examining this sort of confluence of porn and horror. And I very much want to see Pearl now. That's all I have to say.
Well, I'm not going to give anything away about Pearl, but I will say that there is a scene in which someone is watching, because it's set in 1918, and someone watches a porn film from 1918, and it's a silent movie, and it is very pornographic, and it is just great.
I know the pornography has existed since forever. Like it's some of the earliest
drawings.
It's some of the earliest stuff that we as human beings did.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're a weird little species. But whenever people talk about silent film pornography, I always think of Laszlo in What We Do in the Shadows and his boring porn movie.
Bloody boring.
Like, oh God. But yes, I recommend X. You recommended it last week. I recommend it again this week. It's definitely violent, it's definitely bloody, but it does some fantastic things. I found it incredibly entertaining.
Yeah, and I also definitely recommend Pearl. Like, I am so happy that there are some repertory theaters that are doing double features, because that is just a fun night. I can't imagine a better way to watch either of those movies than to watch them together. And if you haven't seen X, watch that first and then watch Pearl. It'll be more fun that way. So, what have I been watching? Well, I saw Don't Worry, Darling, and I liked it. And I'm not sorry that I liked it.
Are you
And
being paid off by Olivia Wilde, Karen?
I can neither confirm nor deny. No. It was funny because I saw the movie, I went to a screening, and on the way home, I called a friend and I was just like, um, Don't Worry, Darling is pretty good. And he was like, I know, what's wrong with everybody? So it's one that it's hard to talk about without going into spoilers because like what I was saying earlier about the way sex is depicted in that movie, it's like once you know the full context, it takes on a totally different meaning. But the movie itself, I think it's very well directed. I think that there's some issues with the script, but I think that's where the issues for that movie are. It's designed very well. The acting is good. Harry Styles' accent changes inexplicably partway through, and nobody ever talks about it. I kind of drew a conclusion about why that could be, and I feel like there's a reasonable explanation for it, but they never go there in the movie, so we have to just assume that it just changed and he just stopped trying to be American. But anyway, it's a gorgeous movie. The production design is beautiful, the cinematography is fantastic, the costumes, everything about the art of this film is really, really great. And yeah, I liked all of the performances. The drawback to it is the script, which falls apart a little bit once you find out what's really going on. It asks a lot more or it gives you a lot more questions that it can't answer in a frustrating way, not in a like, ooh, I want to ponder this, but but that doesn't make sense now sort of way. So that was a little bit too bad. But overall, I really enjoyed this movie. So I think people need to just calm down and stop worrying about all the infighting that happened on the set and just enjoy the movie for what it is.
You mean that there are times where we should actually just watch the movie before we pass judgment on it?
Yes. I would say that 98% of the time that is true.
Although there are some films that I'm perfectly comfortable passing judgment on with never having seen.
That's why I said 98%.
This podcast brought to you by Discussions of Blonde on Twitter.
Oh gosh, yeah.
A film which I am not watching. I'm sorry. It's not happening. I'm not doing it. Don't want to do it. Have no interest in it. Just everybody stop. Just like ignore this movie. It'll go away.
Yeah. I've gone back and forth on that. I'm 100% with you on it, but I'm also like, I don't know. Part of me feels like I have to bite the bullet and be the one to watch it for this show.
If you want to take that bullet, Karen, like I will send you like a little care package or something as a thank you, because I ain't doing it. I'm just not.
But then it's like I don't know if I want to do that to myself. So I haven't fully decided, but we'll see. Was there anything else you watched this week that you wanted to mention?
I have been watching, speaking of sexuality, I rewatched Suspiria, which actually is one of the least sexual of Dario Argento's films. Now that I think about it. But yeah, I've seen Suspiria many times. I love it. I love the fact that no matter how many times I've seen it, I seem to forget most of it. Except for like very, very quick moments, but I'm just like, this plot doesn't make any sense. I don't know what did they even want, but it just moves along on vibes and aesthetic, and I fucking love it.
Sometimes that's all you need.
Yes. I mean, honestly, it's most of Argento's work. It moves along on vibes and aesthetic. There are some that are better plotted than others, but
so another movie that's out this weekend is Avatar, and they're doing a remastered version of it. So I saw that earlier this week, so that one of my friends was like, why are you going to a screening of that? And I said, so that I don't have to pay to see it in the theater. Don't tell Disney I said that. But it's interesting because it still visually looks amazing. the reason people saw that movie, the reason it became the highest grossing movie of all time, uh asterisk, not adjusted for inflation, was because of the visuals. Nobody was going to see that movie for the story or even for the stars. And that is still true. Although I will say that 13 years later, that story is worse than ever. Like the years have not been kind. And I understand that it's always been a problem, but my understanding of the world and my broader understanding of why some of these things are a problem just made it such an uncomfortable experience. So I'm just sitting there, like, I was bored. And I remember the first time I saw it, I wasn't bored. I just knew, like, there's problems with the story. But it was so beautiful that I didn't care as much. Not that I didn't care, but it just, that wasn't my focus. But this time watching it, all I could focus on was how problematic it is and how fucking long it is. And I was just like, I would like to go home now. So, but if you want to see it for the visuals, it is still beautiful. It's even more beautiful now. They've remastered it. And um, back in the day when 3D was really popular, and it was like if you weren't sitting in the middle of the seats, then it was all distorted. This is not the case with this movie. Like I was sitting off to the side and it was still perfect. So for what it's worth.
I don't think I've seen Avatar since it came out.
Yeah.
And I remember going to see it and being like, wow. And then I left it just like, well, that was fucking dumb.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is like I remember thinking the story was dumb too, but now it's like I look at it and go, wait a second. Because I mean, you and I had that conversation a while back where we were like, wait a second. So not only is it white people literally inhabiting the skin of these indigenous folks, but all of the indigenous folks are played by people of color. So it's like that just takes on an extra layer of problem. But then I had completely forgotten that the reason people call them cat people is because they act like cats. So it's like not only are they indigenous people played by people of color, they're also acting like animals.
I didn't really think about that until just this moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now I'm truly horrified. What is wrong with
Mhm.
people? Like
I
I've
know.
seen so many people going like, "Oh my God, it's still so amazing. It's such a great film." Just like, no, it
No.
isn't.
Mm-mm. Nope. Nope, it is not. But again, it's beautiful, and if that's all you care about, then you'll probably enjoy the remastered version. So there you go. Joe Letteri is a visual effects wizard, and he was the visual effects supervisor on that. And I really admire him and his work, so I will compliment him and nothing else. So yeah. Anything else that you watched this week that you wanted to mention?
Nothing major. I've been rewatching a lot of films. Like I said, I rewatched Love Crazy. I've been slowly working through the various Conjuring franchise films.
Nice.
Just
Yeah.
rewatched The Curse of La Llorona last night, the Conjuring one, not the good one. And I do have to say, actually, the Conjuring one is a perfectly entertaining B horror film. Like it's not, people are like, it's the worst horror movie I've ever seen. It's just like, no, it isn't. It really is not. It's a B movie. It is perfectly entertaining. Don't think more about it than that.
Okay. Well, I saved the best for last, and that is The Woman King, which I saw last weekend after
Yes.
we recorded. That movie is so good. It's so, so good. I might actually go see it again today just because it's such a powerful story and the action in it is great. The performances are phenomenal. Like I can't speak highly enough about this film. So it's definitely worth your time. I know there's a lot of questions about historical accuracy, and you know, in just the research that I did, I'm not really clear on where it is inaccurate and where it's not. I think that some things are just kind of more accelerated timelines. I think there's definitely an issue with that. Not an issue, but I think that's part of where people get confused. Like, well, this didn't happen then. It's like, no. Sometimes we do 100 years of history in a week. That's just how it works in movies. But anyway, I think it's fantastic. Gina Prince Bythewood is such an amazing director. Viola Davis holy crap, can that woman not just is she a great performer, we've always known that she's been acting for decades, but uh just she is so commanding of the screen and really does just lead that movie so incredibly well. But separate from her, the best performance in it and the best character in it is played by Lashana Lynch, who just will rip your heart out. She's so great. Yeah, so I love that movie and I think everyone needs to see it.
I that is one that I really, really want to see. I've heard mostly positive things about it. The few not positive things have been about this issue of historical accuracy and particularly about slavery. Which it sounds like that it's more complicated than that.
Yes.
Than
yes.
just, oh, this is inaccurate or something like that.
Right.
At least from everything that I've heard.
Yeah. Well, before I saw it, some of the comments that I saw were literally people complaining that it didn't talk about slavery at all. And I'm like, there's a title card at the beginning of the movie that talks about it. Like from the first moment of the film, it definitely talks about that. Now, how accurate it is as to the Dahomey role in that, I think is subject to a lot of questions. But I also think, just from a lot of other things that I've been reading, I think a lot of people misunderstood the movie and what it's saying. I think that's part of the problem. It's because it's not trying to cover up their role at all. And yeah. And I think it does make the point that they were in, and I had to say this on my other podcast too. Like, I am in no way at all defending the decision that the Dahomey made to sell people into slavery. That is a horrible thing. But I think that it's very clear in the movie and from a lot of the things that I've been reading this week, just like trying to get more of a historical perspective. It's a very complicated issue that had a lot of what's the right word I'm looking for? Anyway, there's a lot to it. It wasn't just as simple as they just felt like they weren't selling their own people. I don't know. Maybe they were, but in the movie they weren't. I don't know. It's complicated. That's the point. And they make it clear that it's complicated.
It sounds like there's a lot more subtlety and nuance than what people have been saying.
Yes, exactly. Anyway, it's great. You should watch it.
Cool. So well, I went to see it. I went to see that. I want to see Pearl. I want to see Barbarian.
Yes. I want you to see all of those. So all right. Well, that is going to wrap this up for this week. We hope you've enjoyed it. And we certainly have. We would like to thank our patrons who keep this show going for us. That is, they are Ollie, Brian, Connor, Estefania, Heather, James, Kathleen, Carriata, Mason, Matt, Michelle, Monty, Nanina, Robert, Steve, Sharon, Tao, and Will. We really, really appreciate your support. If you would like to become a patron as well, you can go to patreon.com/citizendame. And when you subscribe, you get early access to the episodes. You get bonus episodes, which we have one this week coming up for the faculty, which won our poll. So we'll be doing that. We're also going to have some other bonus content coming soon. You get buttons and all kinds of fun things like that. You can also support the show by going to our Zazzle store and buying a t-shirt or a mask or other buttons and things. Zazzle.com/citizendamepod. And we have our Ko-Fi, which is ko-fi.com/citizendame. If you would like to just continue the conversation and see what else we're up to, you can go to our website, citizendamepod.com. We have reviews. We've got a review of Don't Worry, Darling by the time you're reading this. And some other stuff. Lauren's going to be covering the New York Film Festival soon. I'm going to be heading to the Middleburg Film Festival. So we've got some just really fun stuff coming up over the next few weeks. And you can email us if you have questions or thoughts or stuff like that. citizendamepod@gmail.com. And we are, of course, on social media. We are on Twitter and Instagram @CitizenDamePod and Letterboxd @CitizenDame. And on our Letterboxd, we have been I forgot to do it as we were recording today, so that's going to be fun while I'm editing this. But we have an ongoing list of all the films that we've mentioned. We're going to start doing monthly lists so that it'll be easier to keep track of when we were talking about things. But basically, all the movies that were mentioned in this episode will be on our Letterboxd list, and so that way, if you want to go back and look at more about what they were, find out where you can watch them, you can find it that way. Yeah. And we are also available individually on the socials. Lauren, where are you?
I am on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd at LH Business.
And I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd at Karen M. Peterson. So that's going to finish things up for this week. We really appreciate your listening, and we will catch you next time.
Bye.
In the late 1800s, a new and exciting medium was invented, and that medium was called cinema. And then about a week later, that developed into pornos. Now, the first porno film I ever made was called The Adventures of a Very Randy Vampire, and I played the leading role of the very randy vampire. I was cast because they thought that I looked like a vampire, never once realizing that I was a fucking vampire. I took part in thousands of pornos over the years. If you see them now, they are still very, very erotic.